you. Who's ready to hear a story? Yeah. Who's ready to hear a true story? Yeah. Who's ready to hear a true story told without notes? Yeah. I got nothing else prepared, so good night, everybody. My story is also about danger. It's about the biggest danger of all, and that's love. So here goes. When I was a kid, my family really loved taking road trips, and they also were not very patient. So we did a lot of car trips to like places that were really close to Toronto. So like we'd go to like rural Quebec, and we'd like see corn, and they'd be like, "Your dad was born here," and I'm like, "I don't know what's going on." But when I turned 18 and I graduated from high school, my parents thought it would be good to do like the one final family vacation. Which did anybody else have that? Where like the oldest sibling got old enough, and they're like, "We gotta, while the band's still together, we gotta do this because we're never gonna hear from our adult child ever again." So I knew it was a big deal because my parents decided that we should go on a plane to California because we had some family out there. So this was super exciting. This was going to be like the last big trip. And we get to the airport, and they split us up. So they had 3 tickets that were at the front of the plane and 1 ticket at the back of the plane. And because I was 18, I was like, I'm going to the back of the plane. I'm spending 2 weeks with these people. I just want to be as far away from them for like the 6 hours now. So I go to the back of the plane, and I'm sitting there, and there's an empty seat beside me. And this woman starts walking down the aisle, and I'm just overwhelmed by this woman because she's wearing a leather jacket on a plane, which I had never seen before. Because it's uncomfortable in planes. Like, who wears leather jackets in planes? Like, and she had this just gorgeous natural blonde hair that was like cropped in a way that was really cool. And she had these glasses that were like angular and also circular somehow. They were amazing. And she was carrying a copy of No Exit. And I had no idea how to process all of these different things in one person, and I was enamored immediately. Like, I was just completely in love, and I was secretly hoping this person sat beside me, and I was also secretly hoping they didn't sit beside me because that would be a lot of pressure for me to look interesting. And, of course, she sits down right beside me. And up close, I noticed she's just very beautiful and late 20s and someone who is just totally intimidating to me, and she just looks over and says, "What's up?" And I go, "Hey, how are you? I'm doing great." And I do that thing where your voice goes up a full octave in the course of one sentence. And she's sitting there and she's reading her book, and I'm sitting there and I'm imagining like her driving a motorcycle and me getting on the back, and like we go to a book fair or something, I don't know. Because she's bookish and she's awesome. And eventually I'm like, okay, this is going to be a really weird 7 hours if I just sit here like nervously touching myself and don't talk to her. So at some point I'm like, "Hey, so what do you do with your life?" And she says, "Oh, hey, well, I teach little kids, but I also volunteer for this NGO who help disenfranchised people become registered voters. What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a student." And she's like, "Well, what kind?" And in my mind, I know the wrong answer to that question is, "I just graduated high school and I won the choir award, and it's in my bag if you want to see it." So on the spot, I make up maybe the biggest lie I've ever told, which is that I tell her, "Oh, well, I'm a law student, but I'm not going to be one of those like corporate law students who's like a total sellout. I'm going to be one of those law students who like, becomes a lawyer who works for like people who get wrongfully convicted." And, I sit there and there's a moment where she just gives me this stare like right into my eyes, and I'm like, oh no, she saw through my really clever ruse. Because I was 18, I guess I've been told throughout my life that I look mature for my age, which is a really polite way of saying I haven't aged well. But she's just staring directly into my eyes, and I'm like terrified that she's just going to stop talking to me. And she just says, "That's badass, man." And just giant wave of relief just flows over me, and we just start talking, and I start finding out more stuff about her. I found out her name's Claire, and that she's in San Francisco, but she used to live in Oakland, but she left Oakland because this horrible boyfriend cheated on her, and she's done with men. And I'm like, yeah, men, right? And she's telling me about how she's just like travels all over the place now because like she doesn't need people anymore. She's just good on her own. And I'm like, I'm totally the same way. I'm traveling alone also, which was my second lie. And she seemed to buy both of these lies. So I got emboldened, so I started getting bigger and bigger with the lies, and I started constructing this whole other person who was much more political and much more dynamic and much more able to do martial arts than I am in real life. And she's telling me about all of her political activities, and she's like, you know, the worst was when I was at the WTO protests in Seattle. Like, that was nuts. And I'm like, no way, I was there too. And I would have been 12 years old when the battle in Seattle happened, so that's implausible. And then she's like, and you know, it's a 6-hour flight, and we're talking, and when you're together with someone for 6 hours, you just start talking about stuff you never think you're going to talk to a stranger about. So she's telling me drug stories, and I'm saying like, yeah, I did ecstasy, but like, once was enough. And like, in real life, I'd had alcohol once ever, like at this point, so... Then we started talking about stuff I knew more about. So we started talking about books, and I can credibly hold my end of the conversation there. And I almost feel like we're making a real connection and that it's really nice, even though, of course, it's premised on this whole other person who's like a mix of Hunter S. Thompson and Jackie Chan that I'm constructing. And at some point, I looked down at my watch, and I realized that we've been talking for 6 hours. And it dawns on me that pretty soon we're going to land. And when we land, I'm going to have to go and see my dad, who's already wearing shorts and has his glasses on the top of his head. And he's going to say something like, this is going to be the best family vacation ever. And she's going to be like, whoa, what? Like, she's just going to complete, like, the house of cards is going to fall apart. So I'm thinking, and I'm starting to get really nervous. And eventually I decide I'm just going to pretend that I don't know anyone in my family and that, you know, I'll be like, who are these assholes? And then, like, later I'll apologize to them and they'll think it's funny. Like, this is where my thought process is going. But thankfully I don't have to do this, because as soon as we land, the seatbelt sign goes off and she just stands up and says, look, this has been really nice, but I have to go. I've got to catch a bus right away. Sorry, goodbye. And she just takes off for the front of the plane. She runs ahead of like everybody, like nobody sees her coming. And I just have this huge second wave of relief roll over me and a little bit of regret, because I was kind of disappointed that this person just took off after we had this lovely time together. So I reconvene with my family, and I see my dad, and he says, this is going to be the best family vacation ever. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And we get out to the baggage carousel, and I see across the baggage terminal a woman with a leather jacket and cropped blonde hair and these glasses that are angular and circular at the same time. And she's holding a baby. And there's this really nice, polite man standing beside her. And that's when a different house of cards kind of falls apart. And I realized that she isn't done with men, and she isn't out there living on her own, and probably a lot of other stuff isn't true either. And I'm just sort of looking over at her, and she kind of notices me, and she starts staring off a little bit, and then eventually our eyes do meet, and she gives me a little nod like, I've got a family, and I give her a little nod like, yeah, me too. Like, yeah. And then we just turn away and we head off. And that's the end of what I call Mid-Air Chris, and also the end of Mid-Air Claire. And we go back to our lives. And we also go back to trying to figure out who we actually are, in a way. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. This has been fun.